All right, I think we are live. Hey, welcome everyone to, let's see, that would be episode 5, yes, of the Stand to Reason book club.
It's insane.
What's that?
I said that's insane.
That is insane, yeah. You are looking at your hosts. You got John Noyes, who's displaying the book itself. James Sire's book, The Universe Next Door. What is this? This is a 6th edition? Yeah, 6th edition. Mm-hmm. You got myself. Yeah, Alan Schleman, and then Tim Barnett. We are coming to you from California and Canada. Well, I guess probably not the right way to. Probably not the corresponding category, is it?
Well, if you said Ontario, then you'd confuse people, I think.
I would think you're in California.
Yeah, I know. So anyways, like I said, we are doing episode 5 today, which is chapter 7, Eastern pantheistic monism. And so, as we said before, we are just kind of going through different worldviews. We're not necessarily teaching the content that's in the book, but we've read the chapter and we're kind of giving our reflections, our thoughts about it, how it relates or doesn't relate to our own worldview of Christian theism. And if there's comments, questions, we're happy to engage those as well. So yeah, that's our plan. That's our plan for today. Eastern pantheism is interesting to me. I remember many years ago when the movie The Last Samurai came out with Tom Cruise. I don't know, did you guys see that movie?
It's a good film.
Yeah.
A whole bunch of my friends, most of them weren't Christian, but some were really intrigued by it. Like they were just like, oh man, I want to be a samurai. I want to be like whatever religion they are, because it looks so peaceful and disciplined and all this stuff. And it kind of reminded me the way Sire
it's so weird that they say that in the context of samurai warriors.
Well, except for the part where they like cut everybody's heads off. They were just talking about how, like, when they're back in their village, sort of, very disciplined, plowing the field, meditating,
simplicity.
Right. And Sire kind of introduces this worldview in that way. He says, it's like the simple life, uncomplicated lifestyle, quietism, meditating gurus, and that a lot and he kind of points out that a lot of Westerners are attracted to that. They see that and they're like, wow, that's different. That's kind of cool. It's unique. And it just makes me think, as I also think that to a certain degree, you read through like Hinduism or Buddhism or some of their text and you walk away going, wow, I'm not as intrigued anymore, and I'm not trying to be mean or, put it down. But I think a lot of Westerners, if they did then begin to study a little bit more about what Hinduism or Buddhism is about, I bet they would have a similar response, which is like, well, wow, that's quite different, because we tend to think more logically, more rationally, or at least we want to say we do. Mm-hmm. So anyways, I thought that was kind of the first thing that struck me as I began looking at this material.
When I first moved to California from Washington, D.C. as an atheist, it's really interesting. I was starting to lean into my atheism pretty hard, and it was becoming apparent that atheism for me couldn't shoulder the burden that just reality, just life. I mean, this is all just my experience. This isn't an argument for the existence of God.
Sure.
But the first thing I did, which is interesting, once I realized, wait, maybe atheism isn't really the way it is I bought a book on Buddhism.
Oh, really?
And I read it. Yeah. And that that became really, it was quick in how quickly it became clear that too didn't describe reality. I remember reading it and being like, I don't know if I don't think that this just can't shoulder the way I live my life. Yeah. Like, I don't think I could alter my life to line up with Eastern pantheism.
Yeah. Just, as we're talking about this, starting out, what makes this worldview, 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 look at some of the sayings, almost like the fortune cookie style, proverbs. Here's a saying here, and many, you could pull out, these sayings that are self embetterment, how to live peacefully, quiet. You mentioned this, Alan. There is something very attractive about that, and that resonates. And coming from a Western perspective, where you see people, I mean, just turn on the news, when you see the chaos that's going on, or go on social media, and just how people are so angry with each other, and then you have this, you see this, this quote from whoever, some Buddha, and then our guru or whatever, and right. It's like, you know what? Yeah, maybe that's where we should be headed, But then I think you're right, John, that when you start, because I wasn't familiar with everything that we just read in this chapter. A lot of this stuff was new to me. And when you start to dig down into what Hinduism and Buddhism actually teach, and this pantheistic monism, what it entails, it doesn't comport with reality. It doesn't make sense of what I actually experience out there. So all that initial attraction kind of just evaporates when you see that, no, this doesn't actually make sense of reality. I have to actually buy into more illusions. And this is what, I mean, I made this comment when we talked about naturalism, how you have to start, okay, things that I think I know to be true, like morality and free will and rationality and all these other things, they end up being just illusions, That's what that worldview tells you. Well, here we are again, another worldview, and now there's more illusions. In fact, it is even worse with this, because you get right down to it, and everything is an illusion. Okay, there are no true distinctions, and you can't even trust the laws of logic. Okay, I mean, we're going to get into all this and kind of flesh some of this out. But that to me is just, no, that doesn't make sense of what I see in the world.
Yeah. I thought you brought up a good thing there, Tim, where this worldview, I think, seems especially appealing when placed upon the backdrop of the chaos that we're living in a Western culture. And part of that chaos, though, is because in Western culture, we're schizophrenic in our worldview. Hmm. So it's all worldview related, right? If we were consistent with our worldview in everyday life, I don't think the appeal to Eastern pantheistic monism would be there. But he draws this out. Sire says this, because he traces the popularity of in one aspect, it's really old. Right. So it's like, it's super old. These civilizations are so old, and this religion is so old. But in the West, it's fairly recent, and it's placed on the backdrop of, mainly the Vietnam War in the 1960s. And out of that, sprung kind of making this stuff popular. It says, so the swing to Eastern thought since 1960s is therefore primarily a retreat from Western thought. The West ends in a maze of contradiction, acts of intellectual suicide, and a specter of nihilism that haunts the dark edges of all our thoughts. Is there another way? And then said, indeed, there is a very different way. And now what was interesting to me when he described this, why people believe in this, there's something glaring that's different. I mean, that's missing. It's quietism and all this stuff, and it's exotic, and it's radically different than a religious framework, but nowhere is there mention, is it true?
Yeah.
And then as he gets into the chapter, we start to understand why, because there is no real truth.
Yeah. John, this is so good. Because I asked myself as I'm reading this, okay, would there be like an Eastern pantheistic monist apologist? Like, how do you how do you defend this worldview? And I get the answer is you don't.
No.
You know, you just like, and when people raise concerns, you basically say, well, yeah, I mean, okay, that doesn't bother me because there is no truth and there is no logic and there is no reason. And so it's just, I don't know. And this is where you get to the end of the book, and we'll probably talk about this because I mean, we want to, I think, help people here. What do you say to someone who, and this is part of my problem with the material was I hadn't dug in to this material before because frankly, I don't know a lot of people who have this worldview.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I met Jehovah's Witnesses and we started building a friendship, I want to know what they believe. So I started studying, reading everything I could on their belief system and having conversations with them. I don't know too many Hindus or Buddhists. They're just, I live in a pretty diverse area, and it's just for whatever reason, haven't had to interact with that view. So I'm wondering what we're going to be able to say to the person who does have a Buddhist or a Hindu as a neighbor, and they're trying to get a good conversation going. Kind of where do you start?
Well, it's really hard because like Sire states here clearly, the goal is not to be with one another in the same path, but to be headed in the right direction on your own path. That is, we must be oriented correctly. And then further down, this is on page 141.
Yeah.
He quotes Ramakrishna, and he says, do not argue about doctrines and religions. There's only one. All rivers flow to the ocean. Flow and let others flow too. But that also right there kinds of, well, number one, it commits suicide, right?
Yeah, I wrote that down.
Yeah,
I wrote that whole quote.
But also down. This is such an open, like, this is amazing. Like, who doesn't want to believe in this? It's completely inclusive. It's just, hey man, I'm just trying to flow. Let me flow. I'm going to let you flow. Find your river. They're all going to the same place. Just go down. It's like the lazy river, man. Get a cooler of soft drinks and get a raft and just flow, man.
Just flow.
Just flow.
Hashtag just flow. That's what this one's all about. So why? Okay, you mentioned it commits suicide. I think this is really important. So how does this statement here, which I think does embody this philosophy, right? This worldview. Do not argue about doctrines and religions. There's only one. All rivers flow to the ocean. Flow and let others flow too. So what is self-defeating about that?
Well, that is a doctrine.
That's right. That's right. That is a doctrine. I mean, doctrine just means teaching, right? That's what it means. And here is a teaching, a central teaching to the view. And so don't argue about doctrines. And yet he's telling you, he's putting this forth, right, as a teaching. I mean, yeah, it seems to be, certainly he would want to argue for this particular view. I mean, that's his view. So, yeah, it's self-defeating.
Yeah, I mean, the whole chapter, as I read each component of it, I felt a similar kind of thing. And by the end of it, I just took one aspect of each of those sections and just kind of to try to summarize the point Sire was making about pantheism. So well, first of all, the phrase that probably best captures the whole thing is Atman is Brahman.
Yeah.
Which is simply the idea that the Atman is you, or your essence or your soul, and Brahman is, of course, the soul of the whole cosmos, right? But if Atman is Brahman, that means you are part of that one whole, which is the idea of pantheism, that there is no God that is transcendent, right? The universe, the cosmos, is God. Theism says God and the cosmos are separate, whereas pantheism says they're one and the same. So the universe minus God equals zero, basically. Mm-hmm. But anyways, so as I went through each of these sections, as he was looking at the different components of the worldview, it's like, okay, there's one reality. There, there's no distinction between God and the universe. There's no distinctions in general. There's no personalities, right? There's no individuation. There's no doctrine. There's knowledge, but there's not wisdom. There's no morality. You pass beyond good and evil. Time is unreal. History is cyclical. It's like the whole thing was, to me, feels frustrating because, again, and I guess they would say, well, that's just your Western mind trying to wrap your mind around these ideas. But I can't, I couldn't. And, the points that you guys were making about them, these doctrines being self-refuting is one of the reasons why that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like then talking about, the illusion that we're talking about is Maya, right? And that's, and here Sire says, in other words, anything that exists is as a separate and distinct object, this chair, not that one, this rock, not that tree, me, not you, is an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
It's not our separateness that gives us reality. It's our oneness. The fact that we are Brahman and Brahman is one. Yes, Brahman is the one. It's just so hard to, I can't.
Well, you can't, this is the problem. And this is my, I talked about what would an apologist say? Because I'm thinking, what would I'm talking to this person who holds this view, right? And so I want to know, how do I reach this status of enlightenment of, I want to be a guru in this? Well, in most, like in the Christian worldview, if you want to be a teacher of the Christian view, you need to fill your head with knowledge. That's part of the deal. You have to understand more and more and more and more. It's like the opposite with this. As you try to gain more information and more knowledge about this, you're going in the wrong direction, it seems to me. And that's why they go with, these mantras, like saying Om over and over again. You're actually emptying your mind. You have to not think about the illusion that I'm an individual thinking about things, and that I'm in a house with, that's also an individuated thing. And, and so there's this, it's almost like the reverse of what most worldviews would entail, trying to learn more and understand more and whatever. No, you actually try to empty your mind of all that. So you reach a point where you're not even conscious anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the goal, to actually be unconscious, or maybe it's non-conscious. It's very strange. And it just occurred to me, another self-refuting thing. You're trying to, we'll talk about morality and desire and this kind of thing, but even to, you're trying to rid yourself of desires. Well, even that in itself is a desire that you would hold, right?
Well, and like you were saying, it's not about having these doctrines. It's about going down this path or doing this right thing.
Yeah.
But of course, doing the right thing or choosing the right direction presumes there's a wrong direction, which is in itself a distinction. But they say distinctions don't matter. So yeah.
Well, it's also even the Maya itself, like the illusion. Maybe you guys can help me think through this, because I'm trying to wrestle with it, right? So, like, I'm asking myself, well, what is an illusion? In order for there to be illusion, there has to be something, right? An illusion is a departure from,
reality.
I don't know. I'm trying to think this through from reality, right? So in order for even Maya to exist, an illusion, like,
it presupposes a standard of some existence, right? Like, if I'm seeing my house, well, if I see an illusion, it's going to be something that isn't actually there. But that's different than something that actually is there.
And and the naturalist, he runs into the same issue when he says, the objective moral laws are illusory, right? I think there's the same principle. Like, in order for the reality to be illusory, like, it just doesn't make sense. It's almost like a tautology to me. I'm wrestling with this obviously right now in my mind.
I don't know about the naturalism part, but I think that when you for there to be an illusion, that's a distinction between what is real Brahman and what is Maya. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's not all distinctions.
Well, and I guess it's all based because, like you said at the onset, Tim, on this worldview, A can both equal A and non-A at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is just
makes it hard.
Yeah, it's just very strange. So it might be helpful to break down. I don't know how you guys want to break this down, but I'm thinking, in comparison to the Christian worldview, so when in the Christian worldview, the ultimate reality is God, and there's something separate from God, and that is the creation, right? And here in the reality just is one, right? And so there's this immediate distinction. So you couldn't, and this is, I think, the problem. I think there's some Christians who don't understand Christianity. Well, they don't. And they try to bring in, I'm a Christian Buddhist, or I'm you know what I'm saying? Maybe you've heard people talk this way. I've had friends through the years, a friend in high school actually, and he was coming to youth group doing all that stuff, and we were buddies, and we would call himself a Christian, and then he told me that he's also a Buddhist, and it's like, and I didn't know enough about Buddhism to realize that, or Christianity for that matter, to know that there's a fundamental difference between those two worldviews. But we just, at youth group, we played volleyball, and no one talked about doctrine and theology and that kind of thing. So so I didn't have the ability to say, no, those are, you can't be both here.
Yeah. But you can understand like why people would get it confused, especially if you're not digging into the attributes of God or whatever. I mean, because we're told, so omnipresence, right?
Sure.
It's really easy to stumble into the idea that, oh wait, God is everywhere. Oh, God is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Or aseity.
Yeah.
I mean, when you start talking about some of these things, I can understand on a charitable or generous level, but this is why theology is really, really important.
Theology matters.
Understand what it means that God is everywhere.
Yeah.
But God is not everything.
Yeah.
So Star Wars, you mean? Like Yoda says, it's in the trees. It's in the
yeah.
Well, look, you could read, "I'm made in the image of God, therefore, I'm God." I think we'll probably get this when we do the New Age stuff. Right, We're going to see that there's some parallels here. But here I can, I rip a verse out of context and take my pantheistic worldview, which says I am God. Because Atman is Brahman, like this is it, and here's my verse to back it up too, Yeah.
It's hard, man. This was a hard chapter. I think this was probably, for me, it was the most difficult. Just to kind of keep I have a lot of question marks.
Yeah.
like some of the stuff just doesn't, Om is the sustainer of life, the beginning and the end of all creation. That hum, which is the first silent sound, first silent wave that starts from the silent ocean of unmanifested life. Like, what?
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Or they say Om represents ultimate reality, but to say it is not to convey intellectual content. Om means anything and everything, and therefore beyond distinction.
Except for when it distinguishes the sounds of Om.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
like Om is not it's a different sound.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not trying to be mean. I find myself finding it's hard for me to put my mind around this.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to talk about morality? Because that to me was one of the big problems that jumped out in my mind.
Yeah.
I think he begins that on page 146. Is that right? Yes. To realize one's oneness with the cosmos is to pass beyond good and evil. The
Mhm.
cosmos is perfect at every moment. That was kind of his headline, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It goes back to, so sorry, Alan, go.
no, it's all right. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it goes back to like Lewis, right? Where Lewis, he says, in order to be able to recognize a crooked line, you have to have a straight line.
Yeah.
And in order to, the cosmos is a perfect at every moment. What does it mean for it to be perfect? There has to be an understanding, an objective understanding of what perfection is. And it doesn't seem like this version of pantheism doesn't seem like it leaves room for that.
I think that there's two huge practical problems with this worldview, and that is what it's describing here is there's no distinction. So therefore, there's no distinction between good and evil.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is a problem because we all know there is a distinction between good and evil. I think it's
Totally,
I think it's written on our hearts. It's moral intuition that we all have. And so here's the problem. If there is no good and evil, not really, like the distinction is just another illusion like Maya, then that means, look, when I do something evil, it's not really evil. You know what I'm saying? It's just another action. Okay, so that has implications on how I'm going to act. Now, here's where I think and maybe you guys can help me with this. I think there's a contradiction in the worldview, another one. And that is, there's this idea of karma, okay? It's like the universe, it's like Brahman is keeping track somehow, even though there's no morality, but keeping track of when good things and bad things are done. And when bad things are done, well, you have to atone for that. I don't know if that's the right word.
Well, yeah. Obviously, it's not that word, but yeah.
Yeah. There's consequences for that, and so I either in this life or maybe it's the next will pay for that. And here's the biggest problem of all. You can't help someone who is experiencing suffering and evil. At least you shouldn't. Why? Because that's part of the process. That person, because of the way karma works, should be maybe pain sounds the right word, but enduring those consequences.
Yeah.
Whether they were in this life or from a previous life.
Yeah.
And all you're doing when you help someone, okay, so let's say there's someone on the street, they're living on the street, let's get practical, right? They need food, they need shelter, they need clothing, whatever. And I want to, because I believe there's morality, I want to get out there and help them. But the Hindu who's consistent, or the pantheistic monist, if they go and help, they're just extending this person's suffering, right?
They're undermining. Yeah, they're undermining.
They're undermining karma, and karma is going to get its. It's hard to even talk about this, but it's the consequences are going to happen one way or the other. So if I just put a shirt on this guy, well, then I'm just kicking the can down the road, right? And he has to endure that suffering. And when I alleviate the suffering, I'm undermining. You guys would agree with that?
Yeah. And actually, so Tim, that's interesting because in one sense, you aren't able to or supposed to sort of help with someone else's suffering. The flip side of that is the only reason then you're doing anything good is for your own benefit. It's a selfish goal, right? Because you can't do it to benefit somebody else. Otherwise, you're, like you said, undermining the whole system.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's both elements that are problematic there. Number one, it's a self-motivated, it's a selfish an intent, and number two, it's by consequence you're not helping somebody else.
Yeah. And the practical outworking of this historically has been the caste system. It's this worldview that supports and has propagated the caste system in societies and cultures like in India, where you're born into a caste and that's where you remain because that's karma.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so funny because so Jesus, I feel like he addresses this perfectly when he's walking down the street with his disciples and they see the blind man, and they ask, who has sinned, this man or his parents?
Karma.
And Jesus shatters any idea that well, it's neither. He is blind so that God may, you know, show his glory through this man's infirmity, and that when there's no room for that in this worldview. And Alan, I think that you hit like a really important part where I wrote in my margin here on 147 up at the top. It says, but two things should be noted about this system. First, the basis for doing good is not so that the good will be done or so that you benefit another person. Karma demands that every soul suffer for its past sins. Oh, like, I mean, then there's no grace.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no opportunity for forgiveness. Dude, Tim, you mess up, man. You take that second look at that woman who's not your wife, you're going to pay forever.
Yeah.
You know, for
I'm just thinking through this now. I mean, I obviously I read that, but just the way you read that again, I'm thinking, how could anyone ever get out of this cycle of pain for their sins? Because look at, I'm sinning, and of course they put it in quotations because I mean, sin is to violate God's law. That's what sin is, right?
Standard.
Yeah. So what? First of all, I have a question. What is that standard? You know, and so is there a Christian standard being smuggled in here? Like, what's going on with that? But then, okay, I sin again. I got to pay for that. But then I'm sinning as I go. This almost reminds me of, you know, Christians, we debate hell, and I got a conference coming up this weekend that's all about hell. And we talk about, you know, the eternality of hell, people being in hell forever. And some have argued that while you're in hell, you continue to sin against God, and that's one of the reasons you stay in there. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that's a good argument or a bad argument. What I'm saying is, this kind of reminds me of that, because you just continue. It's like you're stuck in this hell, in this cycle where I can never get out because I continue to sin, and that means it's got to be paid for, probably in the next life, and then that creature has to pay for all the things it does wrong, and then you know what I'm saying? It just goes on and on like that. So I don't know how you could escape it.
Well, I don't. For some reason, I don't recall reading it unless I missed it in his chapter. But just from my previous knowledge of Hinduism, you do have this cycle of life and death and rebirth. But then there's what's called moksha, which is where you're released from that soul cycle.
Okay.
So
I don't know.
I don't think it was in his book, but or in this chapter. But if I recall that there is not an option, but a part of it where you can be released from that kind of everlasting cycle.
You need something like that in the system. Yeah.
But even that's based upon, it wasn't mentioned in this chapter. I'm just trying to recall. I think it's based upon efforts and works, and you know, and in this part of the chapter reminded me. I mean, Christians aren't exempt. I feel like a lot of this is smuggled in under legalism too for the Christian. You know, where there's a system of do's and don'ts overlaid on top of your theology, you know, and then the really damaging part is that there's a record kept.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like this chapter was saying, and I don't know how it functionally, I don't know how it operates within this worldview, but it seems to me like somebody somewhere is keeping a record of do's and don'ts and holding you accountable to them.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's got to be like, where's the machine, the system that's doing all this? That's, you know,
like, who knows what I'm doing by myself when nobody's around? On Christian theism, you know, you have an answer,
right?
Yeah.
On this, it's like,
you're right. It seems to require this massive system of accountability and checking. You know, anyway,
like, where is this book that's saying that I have to live my existence as a you know, a bot fly? Yeah, because I was an awful human being in my past life.
Sure.
Like,
and making the assessment that based on what you've done, you've paid off this much, therefore you're going to go and become this. Like, it just seems like it's a really complicated mechanism. that needs to be maintained and run and assessed. The other thing that struck me with this whole morality thing, and I think he alluded to it somewhere, was just that a lot of people, though they may grow up in this tradition, when it comes to everyday living, they sometimes don't live consistently with it. And it reminded me, I used to work in East LA, and a lot of people from the East have come to Los Angeles and worked there, kind of like you were saying, Tim, in Toronto. And so one of my friends, he had grown up as a Hindu, and I remember he would often, when it came down to it, be like, well, we don't believe there is, right and wrong. But then he was, obviously expressing morality and being very concerned about that. And it kind of reminded me of chapter 1 in this book, where Sire talked about how people will act in a way that truly demonstrates what their actual worldview is, even if that's not what they articulate their worldview to be. I think, he said this is our actions may belie our self-knowledge. That was his comment. And then with regards to Hinduism, he brought up that whole book, Siddhartha, where he has his hero talk about how love is the most important thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how is that fit consistently with this? Which, of course, they're going to say, presuming that we need to be consistent is a modern, or is a Western sort of logical concept, which doesn't, isn't required by our way of thinking. So,
and Alan, this is where I think, we're looking for a bridge to talk to people who hold this worldview. And if they hold that, there's love is this like ultimate, well, we can say, that makes sense on our worldview. There is a personal God who is love. I mean, that's what Scripture says. And so what you're longing for is found in reality in the Christian God. You can't find love in an impersonal oneness called Brahman. That's not, how can something impersonal be love? Right?
Yeah.
And so so it seems to me like there is this sense that we know is true, is worldview that is kind of in there, but not that their actual worldview can't explain. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about? Like it's the implicit worldview and then the explicit worldview, or however Sire described it.
Sure. And I think you're touching on exactly what I think I would be tempted to do or say. I mean, although I've had a few Hindu friends, I haven't spent a lot of time dialoguing about religious beliefs and convictions, but it makes me think that that's what I would be tempted to say as well. Well, you talk about love or, these things that are important, valuable. Well, on your worldview, you can't make sense of that. Christianity is the worldview that makes the best sense of reality, which is, of course, a huge thing that we talk about at Stand to Reason.
Yeah.
But again, I suspect that a true Hindu or Buddhist would probably just think it's not important to him or her that their worldview makes the most sense of reality. Because again, that whole idea that there should be some sort of correspondence theory of truth is a very, they would argue, Western logical sort of approach to discerning what's right and wrong, what's true and not true.
They're just flowing, man.
Yeah, that's why. So this guy here or gal who's posted this, I have a close friend who has this worldview, not a Buddhist, but practices some type of Buddhist meditation, and it has been one of the most frustrating encounters. Easy X. Yeah, I can imagine that's the case. Yeah, for sure. Because of the way we think and the way they think. I think the best summary of the frustration that probably a Christian or any kind of other Westerner would have when talking to someone who's an Easterner or holds to an Eastern religion is on page 153 and 154. Yeah. Like this paragraph I thought was just so well written because it really captures the frustration. He in the middle there on page 153, or in the last paragraph in the middle, he says, what can Westerners say? Well, if they point to its irrationality, the Easterner rejects reason as a category. Okay, so you're stuck there, right? If they point to the disappearance of morality, the Easterner scorns the duality that is required for that distinction. If they point to the inconsistency between the Easterner's moral action and amoral theory, the Easterner says, well, consistency is no virtue except by reason, which I've already rejected. And furthermore, I'm not yet perfect. When I'm rid of all of this load of karma, I'll cease acting as if I were moral. In fact, I'll cease acting at all and just meditate. Then he says, if the Westerner says, but if you don't eat, you'll die. And the Easterner responds, so what? Atman is Brahman, Brahman is eternal, a death to be wished. I mean, that totally captures the frustration that Easy X is talking about. And I think that all of us are kind of mentioning with how frustrating we'd find ourselves in a situation where we're trying to communicate, say, Christian theism to a person who adheres to this.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Just whenever we talk about these types of things, it just really makes the scriptures come alive for me. You know, the idea that, I mean, it's spiritual in reality. You know, I mean, there's a spiritual realm, and this is obviously a confused worldview. And oftentimes, I think in the confusion, people find that comfort that they're looking for because it's so confused. But that's why it's important. Again, I stress it's important for us to have a good and right theology, but then also the understanding of the Word of God. You know, so that we know that they suppress the truth and unrighteousness. You know, that God has. I mean, the confusion bounds because they haven't taken every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, and you know, and we have to be careful. Somebody commented here, you know, that there's oftentimes people conflate, you know, or they bring in, you know, like this type of, you know, pantheism into their Christianity. And we had mentioned it before where, Tim, I think you said that you had a friend or somebody who said that they were Christian back in youth group, but they were, you know, a Christian Buddhist.
Yeah.
And this is why worldviews matter and being able to talk about them. But it's also why I brought the spiritual stuff up is because ultimately the winner of souls is the Holy Spirit. And, you know, for me, when I'm having conversations with people who are particularly either confused or hostile, it's a comfort to understand and know that the burden isn't on me to convince this person that their worldview is wrong. I can help. I'm a tool, but it's the Holy Spirit who's acting or gonna act. And I'm glad that the Holy Spirit, that he's real and he's the convictor, not me when we talk about, you know, pantheistic monism. Because I don't need to understand it. Ultimately, I don't know if any of that makes sense to you guys.
No, definitely. I would say that also that something that got me thinking as reading through this, you know, and I've been thinking a lot about for other reasons, but this idea of watching, and Greg talks about it in tactics, watch your language. And sometimes we adopt language of the culture, and we, you know, use terms like karma, you know. And this is just interesting that there was a tweet I read either yesterday, I think it was yesterday or this morning, from a well-known Christian, like thousands of followers. Okay. They were sharing a video.
It was Alan Schleman.
It wasn't Alan, but they were sharing a video of someone doing something, a writer doing something. And then, actually it was, the person was trying to light a car on fire. Okay. And they were pouring gas all over the car. And then of course they go to light it, and they blow, like almost blow themselves up, because obviously you can't just dump gas all over the place, then just light a match.
Oh, because the fumes.
The fumes. This person lit themselves on fire. And I think the homeowner actually put them out, you know, like this kind of thing. Anyways, this person shared the video. They were Christian. Yeah. And they wrote, look, like, oh, isn't karma great, or something like that. And I thought, karma isn't part of our worldview. Like, I know what they were saying, like he's getting his consequences. And the Christian worldview, again, this is where theology matters. There's a sense in which, you know what, there are consequences for actions. You reap what you sow. Okay. This is kind of a biblical principle. And so, but to use the word karma, I think just really muddies things, because there are lots of people who know what karma is. You know what I'm saying? Not like on a popular level, but at a worldview level. And that does not mesh with the Christian worldview. Okay. Like, I'm not paying for sins from previous life. That's not what's going on. That's not what's happening in that video. That video is just this person being an idiot, and there's consequences when you're an idiot, right? You reap what you sow, that kind of deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we just a kind of a practical point, watch our language, and don't, when we see other worldviews and some of their terminology kind of working their way in, that can be dangerous. I think we're going to see that. I haven't read the chapter on New Age, but my guess is there's a lot of that going on, right? The redefinition of terms and this kind of thing.
Sire kind of hits on this a little bit right after that paragraph that you were reading from, Alan, on 154, the second paragraph on the page.
Yeah.
It is, I think, no wonder Western missionaries have made little headway with committed Hindus and Buddhists. They don't even speak the same language, for they hold almost nothing in common.
Right.
So to find that common ground, but they, but then again, I mean, the world screams, right, out at us. The reality is constantly testifying, whether it's through our language or when we stub our toe, or when someone that we love dies. There's a testimony there to the way the world really is, and it doesn't seem like Eastern pantheistic monism can even stand up to that. Just the testimony of the universe around us. This is why when I looked at Buddhism, it was like literally I read a book and then I was like, I'll go on to something else. It doesn't line up with the way the world really is.
So, so my favorite, or the funniest section of this chapter is on page 154 and 155, and this kind of ties back to the thing that I opened with, which is the comment about how a lot of Westerners are kind of, drawn to, Eastern mysticism or whatever, the gurus and stuff. And John, you're laughing because you probably know what I'm talking about here. So I was just thinking of, like, the Westerners kind of like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the East and check out their religions, and they're so cool and whatever. And this is how he captures what ends up happening to the person who does this, right? Sire writes, where then does all this leave the Westerner who has gone east to search for meaning and significance? Many, of course, drop out along the way, try to take a shortcut to nirvana through drugs, or drop out, return to their former faith, or come home and take over their family's corporation, leaving the East behind with little more than a beard left to show for it. And he puts in parentheses, that gets trimmed before the first board meeting and removed before the second. It's like, people are there's so much allure to it in one sense, but then when they finally go over there and see what it's actually like, they're like, wait a minute, this is not what I bargained for,
Well, keep going. I mean, when you keep going, it's really funny. He says, others stay on the path for life. Still, others perhaps find nirvana and remain caught up in contemplation. But many simply die by starvation, dysentery, skullduggery, and who knows what else. Some shipwreck on the shores of Western communities and are slowly made seaworthy by friends.
Yeah, I
thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. The skullduggery. That's the first time I think I've read that word.
Seen that in print.
Yeah. Do you guys use that word pretty frequently?
I want to know what it means. But it's just like, he's really funny. And then I underlined and put a big exclamation next to the last, maybe two or three sentences of the last paragraph. Westerners who are trekking east has seemed to while the number of Westerners who are trekking east seems to decline in recent years, for some the East still holds promise. And so long as it seems to offer peace, personal meaning, and significance, people are likely to respond. What will they receive? Not just an Eastern Band-Aid for a Western scratch, but a whole new worldview and lifestyle.
Oh,
it's interesting.
Yeah. Yep, very true, very true. All right. Anything else? Should we wrap it up?
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. Well, that's it for chapter 7. We are going to be meeting again in 2 weeks. So if you are following along, which we encourage you to do, we're going to be reading chapter 8, which will be New Age or Spirituality Without Religion. That'll be November 19th in 2 weeks. November 19th. That'll be episode 6, chapter 8, New Age. And we 3 shall be back to dialogue, discuss that fascinating chapter.
It'll be fun.
Should be fun. Yeah, isn't that Shirley MacLaine? Was she a New Ager?
Yeah.
I just saw that clip where she stands at the edge of the ocean, puts out her hand, says, "I am God." So
Deepak Chopra. Greg debated him.
that's right. Yeah. So we'll have to. I'll try to whip out that clip for our next episode.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. All right. Sounds good, guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.